Now let's bring in Sky News host Joe Hildenbrand and WA Opposition Leader Basil Zempilas.
Good evening.
Great to see you both.
Lovely to be here. How are you?
Well, let's stick with this Energy Minister's debate today because we saw Ted O'Brien again call on Chris Bowen to apologise for the broken promise. This is now becoming a theme. Will you apologise for your commitment that power bills would be $275 less? Joe, wouldn't it just be better for Albanese to be upfront and go, yep, we got it wrong, I'm sorry?
Yeah, look, I think there is a way to do that, and I thought there was a way for Chalmers to do it last night as well. But I think the fear is with this culture, and it goes beyond politics as well, where you demand that someone apologises for something, and then as soon as they do, it said, ha, you apologised, you admitted it, you were wrong. So instead of making the issue go away, it makes it worse. But I think certainly there's no point in telling people that black is white. There's no point in saying, oh, no, actually, if you close your eyes and squint in the half light, your power bills might have come down.
Read the page backwards.
And there's a way also, I think, of just being honest about it that actually tells a fairly positive story as well. So you can say, yes, look, there were huge rises in 2022, 23, in part as a result of the war in Ukraine. But yes, there were some issues with renewables because people were buying power at higher spot prices because of a lack of sun and wind. Now you're doing
a Chris Bowen and you're trying to explain it away,
I suppose there's a way of, instead of just trying to, change the line of attack the journalist or whatever, you can say, yes, in part that was true, but also there was these other factors as well.
I just think the New South Wales Premier, Chris Minns, has shown how you can say, I'm sorry,
right,
I got that wrong, I regret that. I wanted to make power bills cheaper. In fact, we made them more expensive because of our rush to renewables. Basil, what do you think? Because this is definitely a vulnerability for Labor during this campaign, that promise that they never kept on cost of living.
There's no doubt about that. And I think, to Joe's point, actually the digging in and trying to defend the indefensible position actually is far worse to the voting public than just saying, yes, but gas prices have gone up. Electricity before the rebates has gone up. Here's the reasons why. And even though that might be a touch uncomfortable, it's a much better position than trying to defend something that is clearly inaccurate. And they've dug themselves a massive hole now. And this close to the election, I'm not sure how they change tack on it, but it's hurting them. It certainly makes Bowen look bad. It doesn't help Albanese. It doesn't help any of them.
And, just to that point, we did see Peter Dutton on Monday come out and go, I got this wrong in the working from home policy. So it can be done. Dutton's done it. It wouldn't be hard for Albanese.
Sharri, and we're not talking about it today, are we? And that's the point. If you come out, you deal with it, as uncomfortable as it might be to have to go through that mea culpa, it's done and dusted. We're pretty forgiving in Australia. Even the journos are pretty forgiving in Australia. But by digging in, they've made it worse.
Yeah, you cauterise the wound, exactly. Now, Senator Nampijinpa Price has claimed that the Albanese government may proceed with plans for an Indigenous treaty and a Makarrata truth-telling commission. She says that they've been absolutely opaque in Senate estimates with regard to Makarrata, the $27 million that they supposedly put in a contingency, and what direction they're going to take. So, Joe, what do you think? Is there any chance of this,
no, there's
what
not.
Jacinta's saying?
There's not. I mean, I can understand Jacinta saying that, they're not ruling it out or it's still possible that they might or whatever. And probably the government is not wanting to emphatically say there's no way we're ever going to do this because that would upset certain members of the left who would jump up and down and make a noise. And that's obviously incredibly unhelpful in an election campaign or ever. But no, the government is doing nothing. And I know this for a fact from figures right up the very top. Once the voice
You've asked them about this.
Once the voice went down, it was all about practical reconciliation, all about service delivery, all about just getting in there, cleaning up those communities, getting more money for education, getting those grog bans back in place, getting more money for housing for Indigenous people, and it's all practical stuff now. Any of that symbolic kind of big picture, history, rewriting, truth-telling, apologising, it's the furthest thing from the PM or the government's mind, I promise.
Basil, we saw Peter Dutton speak about the failed voice referendum in the Leaders' debate, and it seems like a lot of voters have forgotten about this. And this was really the point where Albanese started losing momentum and the public turned against him. But it reminds people how actually Dutton can campaign very effectively. It was a 60-40 vote to begin with in support of the referendum. He campaigned against it and it switched. So, but perhaps it is a reminder that he can be strong at campaigning. There's 3 weeks to go. Do we need to see a bit more of his fight, do you think?
Well, he's a good campaigner, there's no doubt about that, and he can construct and hold an argument very well. I'm not certain, though, that making more of the voice and referring back to the referendum would necessarily be a smart or the correct policy for Peter Dutton and the Libs at this point. They take their win in the referendum. They got the result that they campaigned for. I think people do see the election, the general election, and the referendum as quite separate issues, and I think the smart play is to keep them that way.
Agreed.
Well, let's turn to this story. Shocking revelations today around teaching standards. The Australian reports that some universities are taking students who have HSC results as low as 39%. Now, the report says that there's 15 universities who are accepting students into teaching degrees with ATARs lower than 60. Now, the Education Minister, Jason Clare, was asked if teachers need to be more intelligent than their students. Pretty reasonable question. Here's what he said. We'll read out his comments. He said, "I think that's a given." Joe, if this is his attitude, then why isn't he doing something about this? Because it is a good point. We've got children who can't read, can't write, and, perhaps it's because the teachers didn't even pass their HSC or VCE.
I think there's a couple of things. One is that teacher burnout has been so high that there's a teacher shortage, and that of course increases the chance of being burnout because the teachers that are left behind do more. And then there's a panic. You think, oh my God, we've got to get more teachers, which we have right now. There's a huge teacher shortage to the point where people are bringing teachers out of retirement back into the classroom to try and do it. Teachers are job sharing the same class. And of course, the instinctive thing to do is say, all right, well, we need to lower the mark so we can get more people into teaching degrees. And in fact, as Jason Clare well knows, and as he is working towards doing, it's the opposite that you do. It's not the lower mark that attracts people to teaching. It's actually teachers having respect and prestige within the community, with them actually being given the freedom to be able to teach a class with world's best practice methods, with actual scientific results instead of the latest sort of trendy mumbo jumbo. So that is something that that Jason Clare is doing, and at The Telegraph we've done big sort of features on what he's doing, attracting people from other careers into teaching, making it easier to get into teaching degrees. With the University of Tasmania, obviously it's a very small university. It has to attract people right to the very bottom of Australia. People have to obviously move there, and so it's ATARs are always going to be lower than a Sydney or Melbourne university, but certainly teaching should be like lawyers and doctors. It should be a profession that people aspire to and actually want to compete to get into.
And the way to do that is, or part of the way to do that is improving pay. Don't you think, Basil? Teachers need to be paid more. We need to have the absolute smartest, brightest, most creative people teaching our next generation. We despair at the fact that there are teenagers and children who can't read and write, and this is why. This is part of the problem. Pay them more.
Well, we talk about respect, and nothing shows that we respect our teaching staff right around Australia more than paying them the right amount of money to do the such important work that they do for the next generation of Australians. They're shepherding them through. And the other point I'd say is a really basic point. We have to make schools safer. We know lots of schools are perfectly safe, but we also know that violence in schools, at times directed at teachers, can be very, very frightening. And it has discouraged lots of good teachers away from classrooms, and the next generation potentially coming through thinking, I'm not sure that's the environment we need to be in or want to be in. That has to be a priority as well.